So this has been a truly extraordinary period. I think we've all seen across the world, not to mention with the pandemic, but it's been a genuinely extraordinary few years. I mean, I think a few themes that I point to. Firstly, I think the range of structural shifts that we're seeing across the economy, economic nationalism worldwide, but arguably offset actually by a sort of pragmatic tech-supported globalization and connectedness, I guess, of economies and people. Not to mention the other big structural shift, so things like empowerment of women. So I think the fact that we're finally seeing, arguably 50% of the world's population that in, certainly many economies have been suppressed in terms of contribution to the planet. The breadth, depth of ideas, leadership, opportunity, commercial sector, private sector, across the public sector and beyond is truly remarkable, I think, in terms of the shifts we're beginning to see. But also right the way through to just day-to-day how the economy works globally. Connectedness, the digitization of the economy, travel patterns, leisure, consumption patterns, etc. So I think there's a set of real sort of structural shifts we've seen in recent years that obviously impact the investment themes for the trust and beyond. I think there's a whole second piece around stakeholder demands. So arguably it's a more connected, more informed, more aware planet than previously. I think the ability for stakeholders, whether it's consumers, regulators and beyond, to be so much better informed than ever before, and therefore effectively an exponential rise in demand and complexity of demands in so many sectors. I think there's a third piece to me around what I think of as almost a sort of how we work and the kind of underlying values and mindsets and so on. So I think we've seen off the back of the pandemic, but arguably before, a more compassionate planet, more sensitivity to people, to the health of the planet, climate change and beyond. And then I think finally, really a piece around sort of supervision and regulation and oversight and a recognition of the importance of pragmatism and effective thinking around how industries and sectors are supervised. So I think with those in mind, if I look into the trust, I think diversification has proven its benefits. So we have a series of quite concentrated investments, but across an overall diversified portfolio. I think the long-term strategic perspective that we take on our investments is key. And then I think as you drill down into how we measure, monitor, govern and so on, and the independent challenge, of course, of the board, given the investment trust structure, I think all of the above has shown itself to be absolutely essential to the trust performance. And then I guess in a nutshell, I'd say, very good performance by the trust, per unit risk we've taken in an extremely uncertain and volatile market. So at F&C Investment Trust, we've got a really firm belief that good governance creates value. We see that in terms of independent challenge across all of us as non-exec directors of the company. We see that in terms of taking the longer term perspective, so taking a really strategic view in terms of how we deploy client investments, client assets across the world. We see it in terms of diversity of thinking, so part of the board role and indeed the committee roles is about independent perspective and really diversity of views. That could be by asset class, by geography, by sector, by functional experience and expertise. So I think for all of those reasons, what it boils down to is really a couple of things. One is bringing effectively a critical friend, so someone who's willing to challenge and think and support the whole company in its future success, and indeed all the teams of people and the partners that work with the company. And bringing the appropriate level of support and challenge together based on a real compassion for our investors and for the company's long-term future, but also drawing on the best experience and expertise we've got. And then I think the final point I'd say about both the board and the committees, it's about really forward thinking, so the right level of insight and foresight in terms of what the future for our shareholders and the future for our portfolio could bring. So my background really spanned technology, risk, strategy and transformation across financial services and a range of consumer sectors. That's seen me spend many years at McKinsey, also in Barclays and HSBC as a managing director in technology and risk. and then now both in board work, advisory, and investing. What does that mean in practice for the trust? Well, I think there's one piece around sort of insight and foresight on trends that will impact the portfolio going forward, whether that's across technology, digitization being a huge driver of economic growth, both currently but also for the future, and whether it's also thinking about consumer and investor demand. So how do we tap into the hearts, mindsets of future investors for the trust, as well as our current investor base, and why they might want to support the trust longer term? I think related to that as well is about the underlying values and judgment calls. So a real ruthlessly compassionate commitment to our investors and really bringing our investor voice to the table in the board alongside all of my colleagues. And then I think related to that as well, making sure we're going for evidence-based judgments and evidence-based decisions wherever we possibly can. We live in such a data-rich, technology-rich world now. The ability for you or I to tap into data insights and really support judgments in the boardroom, I think is remarkable. So I try to bring all of the above, and I think that tech, risk, strategy and transformation background supports my role in the board. So I think this is an enormously exciting chapter in terms of how technology and data really are changing lives across the commercial sector, public sector and far beyond. I think firstly I'd point to the kind of winner takes all. So scale and the benefits of scale and taking the global perspective is going to be really crucial to the future. I think there's a second piece about being nimble. So those organizations that are able to be really adaptable and nimble around how they not just meet current demands, but actually can have the insight and foresight to look to upcoming demands from consumers, regulators and far, far beyond. I think there's a third piece around effectively the ethical monetization of data. So how is it that you can tap into the vast amount of data, the incredible amount of data now available, and actually turn it into insight which can be monetized? And when I say monetized, it could mean for profit and for commercial purposes, or indeed far beyond in the healthcare sector and public sector and far beyond. And then I think there's a final piece to that, which is making sure that tech is an enabler and data is an enabler as well, as opposed to almost a sort of challenge or a blocker or a source of complexity. So I think those organizations that I work with where we've really been able to tap into the outcomes that are required, the why, the so what, the consumer demand, the regulator demand, the shareholder demand, and then technology being seen as a solution and a very much product-driven solution to be able to meet those demands has been really essential in terms of hearts, mindsets, but also, frankly, pace of delivery in terms of actually making the changes that are needed. So at F&C Investment Trust, we've delivered positive returns for our investors against a relatively modest risk profile. And this, of course, as we've all seen, has been a period of exceptional volatility and exceptional uncertainty in the markets for all sorts of reasons, and even exceptionally volatile compared to the global financial crisis of 07-08. I'd point in particular to the diversification across our portfolio. So we have a series of relatively concentrated investments, but in an overall diversified portfolio. I think I'd also highlight the sort of structural long-term strategic view that we take. So we take very, very careful consideration, whether it's across our geographic commitments, whether it's across global macroeconomic trends, etc. We're very thoughtful and we're very long-term in how we deploy all of our investments. I think there's a third piece within there around our ESG commitments, and really, as well as taking a very compassionate, really focused approach around meeting our investor needs and our shareholder needs, we're also really compassionate and really focused around our environmental, social and governance commitments. So whether that's about the independence of the board and the good governance and challenge and scrutiny that we bring as non-exec directors, or whether that's about our wider social good, our wider commitments around decarbonising and climate change and so on. I think those are essential to our success and actually essential also to the economic performance for the long term in terms of our investor returns. So overall, I'd say a positive bill of health in terms of performance, and I'd say that we are well positioned in terms of the portfolio's position for future returns.